All right, hello everyone. Hello. And good morning to our live streamers and those watching months from now when the snow is on the ground, which is not today.
Thank goodness.
Thank goodness. Although the rain, oh my, I'm pretty much done with the rain. How about you?
Amen.
My daughter lives in Houston.
Oh yeah, Houston. At least we're not Houston. But we say that a lot. At least we're not Houston. Yeah. Well, it went away. Come on. All right. We're going to see how far we get today. I've got 66 pieces of art I want to tell you about.
Today?
Well, we'll see. Some of them are quick. Some are not. What I want to sort of model for us today is, look, I am not an art expert. I am an art lover. I have never taken an art history class. I've never taken an art appreciation class. I may screw up stuff, but
Well, we won't know.
well, some of you are much smarter about this than I am. So if I identify something in the wrong period or the wrong style, you just forgive me and correct me and move on. Okay? Help me out, Mike. Help me out. Like most people in art, I know what I like and I know what I don't like.
There you go.
There's certain kind of art that fills an entire wing of a museum, and I can pass right by it and not miss a thing. Right? So what I'm really interested in most of all is I'm fascinated in religious art, which plans to be straight in the Renaissance, obviously. But there are also, I'm always looking for inspirational or religious messages in art that's not blatantly inspirational, right? So several of the things we're going to talk about today are pieces that I sort of stood at and thought, oh, well, that reminds me of this, or this, I'm always taking notes on things, and I'm even on a tour, like I'm stopping and taking notes on my phone, so I'll go look something up and remember it later, or go investigate that. For example, this is not art, but sort of it is. Those of you who've been to Paris may know that we were like on a little river cruise down the Seine, and they're narrating everything, and it was sunset, it was beautiful, and one of the key bridges there in central Paris over the river was built with stones from the Bastille prison when it was torn down. And I'm here, I'm like taking a note, thinking, wow, that's a wonderful illustration of turning prison stones into bridges, right? So that, to me, that bridge is a piece of art in a way because it tells a story.
Mark, if you get a chance to watch the Japanese channel, it's NKL, I think it is. It's the most fascinating channel you'll ever watch.
The Japanese channel?
It's Japanese, but they've got the English subtitles.
Okay.
And it's art and
Not all in Japanese.
Okay.
It's fascinating.
By the way, to that point, I think it was Ann or one of you last week mentioned to me about the Nova segment on PBS about building the great cathedrals. Was that you, Ann?
Yes.
Yeah, it was one of you.
And I just sent you a link to it.
Oh, yeah. So that was that aired this past week, and you can find it on PBS. Really interesting stuff about the great cathedrals, and Notre Dame is in there along with several others, and sort of answering the question: how did they do this, right? And the architectural marvels. So what I've got today for you is a journey through some art that I saw that sort of spoke to me. I want to tell you some stories. So this is not a Bible lesson per se. There's not a chapter and verse to this today, but I think you'll find a lot of theology in this, and welcome your dialogue. Some of the pieces I'm going to show you, and I would love to get your reflection on them as well. Let's see, what else to say about this? I'm trying not to give you the stuff that you've already seen. So yes, we saw Michelangelo's David. I'm not going to show you Michelangelo's David today because there's actually something in the same room that I find to be more interesting that is more obscure, but some of you have seen it as well. So I'm going to show you pieces that maybe you've never seen. Certainly, a lot of pieces I have never seen as well. So, Jim, let's hit the lights and make sure everyone can see here. And I've got my cheat sheets. Oh, I'm just going to begin with a poem. So I gave you 3 more poems today. So this is in the Liverpool Cathedral. Last week, or the week before, I showed you some images from the Liverpool Cathedral. It's one of the it is the largest Anglican cathedral in the United Kingdom. It's a remarkable place. And there was this art installation. I mentioned this to you 2 weeks ago. It was there. These are fabric photographs. They're 7 feet long.
Wow.
So, I mean, look at the scale in this room, right? And they're hanging by like fish wire, right? Fishing line. That kind of thin, so you can't really see the wires. And these are all photographs of women from Colombia who have witnessed violence in the wars that are going on there. And I was so moved by this. It was so impressive. Say again?
When did they put those in there? Do you
Well,
know?
it's temporary. Yeah, it's a traveling thing, like we have stuff, only their venue is a lot better than ours. Yeah, they're going to work great. So this is the main part of the cathedral, but it's on the back end. This cathedral is so large that even with that, there's plenty of cathedral space left up front for all the cathedral-y things that happen. There's a name for this part of this that I can't remember. So this is the first poem you have here. Floating in air, the pain on these faces looks lighter. See in their eyes the things they have seen, tortured by witnessing war. Cathedral spaces cannot smooth the trauma these eyes have seen. Columbia's worst. Faces peer from sheets dancing in the wind, each the size of a shroud. Hear the voices of the women, silent but speaking loudly. We're hanging by a thread.
Oh, that's beautiful.
And Mark, did you say this was in Liverpool?
This is in Liverpool at the Anglican Cathedral,
Oh, okay. Thank
which if you ever go to Liverpool, this is a wonderful place to go see. Remember I showed you the Roman Catholic Cathedral that's just down the street that looks like Star Trek?
Yeah.
Yeah. And a reminder, the guy who designed this place, who also designed the British phone booth, was, so the small and the tall, from the same guy. When he got the commission to design this cathedral, he was 22. Had never designed anything. So there's hope for all of us too, right?
Not to be 22.
So, not to be 22. Unless we find a time machine. So, the artist did these photographs this way because a 7-foot fabric is the size of a shroud. So my reference in the poem, that was intentional to what that is. Right. So what do you think about that? Is that amazing, isn't it? The photo doesn't really do it justice.
Off topic, but not totally. If you have the opportunity to see this new documentary called The River and the Walls, don't miss it.
Oh, about the U.S.-Mexico border, right? Yeah, I read about that. Okay, moving on. This one's a little dark, and on your handout it's really dark, and it's small. This is a piece of art that I found at the Tate Modern in London, and it's called Cathedral. So this is on this handout like this. Anyone need this? We should still have extras back there. Yeah.
It looks like
This is your guide to the art. Yeah. So can you see this? It representing stained glass. Can you see the so go from what we just read to this, and it's really dark because of the colors that are used, and Norman Lewis so this is from 1950, right? And this was a black artist who was really one of the first black artists to work with abstract imagery in the U.S. And this is part of a group of works you'll see here from his studio in Harlem. And one of the things that motivated him was having served in World War II, where black and white soldiers served together, and coming back to Harlem and discovering nothing had changed back home. And so part of the darkness of the coloring here reflects his heritage and pointing towards skin tones as well, I think. I'm reading into his mind here. But it's a beautiful, we think of cathedral glass as bright and shiny and blues and yellows and, all what you just saw in the other one. And yet he's painted a different picture of a cathedral here. But yet still full of color. Say?
Does he have a studio in Harlem?
Well, I don't know if he's still alive.
Did he?
Would have. Yeah, his studio was in Harlem. That is correct. Yeah. Thoughts on that? Yes.
That reminds me of the window that you showed us last week where the cathedral had been bombed and it was filled
Yes.
with modern.
The modern
rays.
glass in the old cathedral.
And you can see the faint outline of the white cross there.
You sure can. Yes.
It looks like the facade of a cathedral. There was a painting by Monet who did the Westminster Cathedral.
Yes.
Very blurry, pulled back picture. That has the same, that's the
It
root,
does,
I think.
but with different coloring, right?
Yes,
Yeah, if you know
very
that
much.
Monet, it's a really famous Monet of Westminster. Very, very good. Excellent point. So a lot to be said about that. It's one of those things, the longer you look at it, the more you're going to see, right? And the message to me is about subtlety here and understanding the story behind the painting and who the artist was, what was motivating them. Sort of gives you a new insight in something that otherwise you just might walk by and say, well, that's pretty. Right, Caroline?
I was going to say, the thing that struck me the most was possibly the blood from Harlem and the blood from the war.
Well, I think that's an excellent observation. I mean, just back from World War II, it's 1950, right? And that looks like blood, doesn't it? Yeah. So you could apply that to the war, you could apply that to the cross, the cathedral. Yeah. Good eyes, everyone. Yeah. I'm going to give you a certificate in art. It's worth the paper it's printed on. So this is also from the Tate Modern, and this is Georges Braque, 1909. And this is called Mandora. The artist collected musical instruments, and what you see here is an instrument called a mandora. Can you see the strings? Can you see the opening in the sound box right there as well? What I like about this piece is the abstraction of it sort of gives us the feel of the sound of it. It's like Fantasia, Disney's Fantasia, where you see the notes sort of pop up on the screen. This feels like syncopation to me visually. And I like the idea of being able to visually represent something that's normally heard. We think of those being two very different senses, and yet I think this artist has the ability to connect those two to help us think on more than one plane. Thoughts on this one? Comments? Yes?
How about sort of a visual onomatopoeia?
Visual onomatopoeia. Yeah, an onomatopoeia, of course, being a word that sounds like what it means. Yeah.
Did you bring yours to play?
No. Okay, now this is, there are two photos I'm going to show you here. This is also the Tate Modern. This is called Purification. Now, this is a large banner that probably runs almost the length of this wall, a little less. It's very, very wide, and it's probably 5 feet high. Okay, and it's on something. It's a kind of it's a rough canvas here, and you see these images. What is written all along here are sentences taken from the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the artist has called this a nightmare frieze of humans being abused, amputated, beaten to death, in contrast to ideals put forth by the UN. So let's look a little closer on it. You can see in that close-up, again, the colors are important here. It looks like bruises, it looks like blood, right? And right here it says, I'm getting ready for a minute, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity. All are equal before the law and entitled, and so forth and so on. It goes all the way down. Everyone has the right to nationality. No one shall be, whatever. And so these ideals that we say we want to live into are contrasted, juxtaposed with these images of violence. I think that's the reality of the world we live in, right? Our words and our actions don't match in that. It's a powerful piece of modern art. Comments, thoughts on that? All right, moving on. Now, this is something perhaps a little more familiar. I had to give you a Renoir somewhere, right? So this is called At the Theater, and it's just a nice piece to show you. This is from 1876-77, and we see a young girl and her chaperone seated in a theater box. And what is fascinating about this painting is Renoir makes them the focus of the painting, not what's going on the stage. And as I stood and looked at this and contemplated, I thought, okay, that's a good reminder that sometimes what's happening on the stage is not the focus of what we need to pay attention to, right? Here, the focus is on the individual, the girl, having the experience more than on what's happening on the stage. And that's a good reminder to us sometimes. Had some of y'all seen this piece before, this Renoir? Yeah. I mean, Renoir's work is just so well known that it's hard to find one you haven't seen it. Right?
But I love the way he makes you feel like you're a part of, just like you said, of witnessing that girl's experience.
Yeah.
Seeing on her face her experience.
Yeah, isn't that lovely? Because think about the first time you went to the theater, or the first time you went to a ballet,
anything,
or opera, whatever, and the magnificence of it,
and
right?
how you've spoken so much about that as you've traveled on your journey. Your experience has been so powerful and moving as hers is.
So I was reminded we were, so as you know, we love to go to the theater, we love to go to the symphony, and you go enough to something like this and you take it for granted, right? And we were going to the symphony Friday night, coming up the steps from the parking garage into the Meyerson, and there was a couple ahead of us who were stopping and literally taking photos, selfies, all along the steps. And it occurred to me, this is their first time here in this magnificent place. The wonder of being in a place like that you don't take for granted anymore, right? Like, we just sort of breeze through, right? And what's happening on the stage is the most important thing, and often it's the transformation that's happening in the listener or the viewer that really is the important thing in that.
The colors are really compelling. That's what
They're lovely colors, right? They make you feel warm and happy, and unlike the previous
But
piece.
you had to do to make those colors? You
Well,
didn't
there's
go buy
that
a
too.
tube of paint.
All right. Now this is a Van Gogh, or if you're being correct, Van Gogh. From 1890. This is at the National Gallery in London. And I chose this particular piece to represent this artist because the irony of this, I mean, those of you who know his life know he was a deeply troubled soul, right? And he spent the last years of his life in an asylum at St. Remy. And this painting is of the garden at the asylum. And his description was, in that garden, the grass grows tall and unkempt. And just to think about painting something so beautiful from an asylum, right? Out of the chaos of that place and the pain of that place, here's this beautiful thing, right? And to me, it was a good reminder that out of the chaos of our lives, and when we think things are just gone to wherever they go, right? That I can't say in Sunday school.
Purgatory.
Gone to purgatory. Gone to Hades. Sometimes, someone reminded me of this week. That sometimes out of the most difficult times of life, the most beautiful things occur when we least expect it. And this painting reminded me of that. Comments, thoughts on that?
He saw beauty where we would just, like you said about the symphony, we would just pass it by. Like that was probably a grown-up garden. It was
Right.
like
It's an unkempt garden.
scraggly, and you think, well, it needs to be mowed. And he thought it was beautiful.
Actually, we would say it needed to be mowed. He found beauty in it, right? Wonderful reminder to us to stop. As the song says, you got to stop and smell the roses along the way.
How can somebody who's so troubled inside paint something so beautiful outside?
Well,
I think
so
most
yeah,
people that paint something beautiful are troubled inside.
Yeah.
so
I mean, most
so many
artists-
great artists were deeply troubled, right? Friday night we heard Beethoven's Symphony No. 4, which is a seldom played symphony, but it's one of the great ones that came obviously right before the famous Fifth Symphony. Da, 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 right? And the other thing to know is that as Beethoven was writing that symphony, it was one of his most productive years for composition, but he was losing his hearing rapidly, and there was illness. There were other things around that were not good, and yet out of that, we had this beautiful symphony, right? So there's hope for us. Yes.
In Amsterdam, there's a Van Gogh museum, and they have them arranged in order of the painting, and it was so easy to see the progression of his illness, as you got further down the.
Yes, could y'all hear what Ann was saying? Just to repeat for the live stream folks. In Amsterdam, there's a Van Gogh museum, right? And they're arranged chronologically, the paintings, and she was saying it's very easy to follow the progression of his own mental illness through those paintings.
There was a movie that just came out with Willem Dafoe playing Van Gogh. Have you seen that?
I have not, but it's on my list. Yes, Susan.
The one before that is called Loving Vincent, and it is very unusual that they took like 200 artists, 2 years. Each frame is done by artists, and they have Van Gogh's work in the background, and they have actual actors play the parts of his life, and it's Loving Vincent.
Loving Vincent.
That's how he signed his letters.
Loving
And
Vincent.
they do several of his letters with people. It's very good.
All right, moving
Where
on.
was that?
Thank you. Say again.
Where was that, Susan?
It's a movie called Loving Vincent.
It's a movie about
okay.
5 years ago, not the latest one with William Dafoe, but the one with Willem Dafoe, but the one before that.
So this is a Cézanne painting from turn of the last century, somewhere between 1894 and 1905. This is at the National Gallery in London. It's called Bathers, and what I think is interesting about this piece, personally, is the angularity of it. Right? Oh, by the way, I forgot to warn you. There's nudity. There's nudity in today's lesson. Some of you may need to avert your eyes occasionally. All right?
Viewer discretion is advised.
Viewer discretion is advised for mature audiences only. Right?
Oh, well, we're on.
But it's art. Okay. So what I think is interesting about this piece is the use of the angular. Look at how everyone here is sort of angled at different ways and pointing in, and the background is also sort of laid against it. It's a wonderful use of composition technique here to draw attention right here. Okay, those of you who are artists or photographers or have done any design work or have taken a class about any of this know about the importance of the rule of thirds. And so the rule of thirds is a variation on the Fibonacci sequence that basically says the eye wants to go, needs to go to not the center of a visual thing, not the edge, But if you drew a grid across here to divide this in thirds, so here, and here, and here, and here, the eye wants to go to those intersections, here, and here, and here, and here, right, roughly, more or less. And what Cezanne has done here is use the angularity of that to sort of point us right here in this, which is pleasing to the eye. Does that make sense? Even though the background is pointing the other direction. So do you sort of see the yin and yang of this? And there's a life lesson. I know I'm drawing like philosophizing way too much about art here. But to me, it's a reminder of the cross currents of life, that even though the background's going this way and the people are going this way, together makes a beautiful picture. Yeah. Thoughts?
I was
Okay.
going to say on that one, the thing that surprises me, I was born with a larger head, and I tell people it's because there's more brains in it. But the people in here, their heads are not proportionate at all.
No, they're not. Yeah, they're sort of Rubenesque in a different sort of way. Jim?
Marcus, it seems like most of them at least are looking toward this figure on the left.
Yes.
They're angular toward her, and she's facing them,
Yes.
and they're all female.
Right. Right.
And,
It's a nice little concave going on there, right? Conclave.
yeah.
Okay, I'm going to move this on. This is a piece that's going to be very hard for you to see because it needs to be much bigger than what we've got here. And I don't know, is there a way for me to make this bigger? I think there is.
I usually do like, what is it, Control Plus? Is that it?
Yikes.
Isn't that what it is?
Yes.
Control Plus? Hold down, is it Command Plus? On the Mac. What do you have, a Mac or a?
Yeah, hang on. I have made these bigger before.
It says Command Plus. Hold down Command Plus.
Yeah, it's not liking it.
That's on, oh,
And now I've got that little thing there that I don't want to be there.
We don't care about that.
Good job, Bob.
We don't care about that.
There's a way to make these bigger.
That's your homework for this week.
Okay, well, anyhow, this is a piece by the landscape artist J.M.W. Turner. And I will say that,
I think if you try that little slide thing at the top of your
Yeah, is that not a Zoom thing at the upper left?
Sorry, never mind. There you go.
There you go. You got rid of the other thing.
you right click and does it say?
Oh, you had it.
Something happened.
Oh.
Whoop, that wasn't it.
We're good, we're good.
It got bigger for a second, but then it went.
okay. One of the things I noticed traveling by train, particularly around Europe, and particularly England and Wales, was how so many of the landscapes looked like a Turner painting. Right? If you've seen enough of those, you know. And I'd be looking out the train window and thinking, that looks just like a Turner painting, right? So it's really, legit. What's interesting about this one, and dang it, I wish I could get it bigger. So this is a train coming through the fog, advancing over a bridge over the Thames. And what you can't see in here is just buried way down in here, I think over here, is a rabbit running for cover.
Oh, my goodness.
Right?
I see it.
Yeah, can you see it? Of course you see it. Yeah. That's something else. Okay.
I was going to say the train, which there's a rabbit.
You asked about that rabbit, what was it doing there, right? Okay, I love this piece. This is Rembrandt. You could probably tell that just by looking, if you know anything about Rembrandt. 1644, okay? This is at the National Gallery in London. It's a large piece. And it's called The Woman Taken in Adultery. Okay, so what is fascinating to me about the composition of this piece, again, go back to the rule of thirds that we talked about. Where's the action here? It's all the way down here in the lower third. I mean, those of you who are pragmatists are going to say he's wasted 2/3 of the canvas with nothing.
Isn't that a cathedral?
It is effectively a cathedral. Now, clearly, the woman taken adultery was not in a cathedral. So Rembrandt has placed her in this place that reminds us of a cathedral. I think that's really important, right? George says in the sermon today how, which by the way is an outstanding sermon.
Yes.
One of the top 10 in my book. I'm keeping score.
Is
George
that like
says
for all
how
30
sad.
years? Or 20? Is that for like all 30 years?
Yeah. Things keep dropping off. Yeah, to get in the top 10 list. One of the things he says is how sad it is that it's Christians who are acting like wolves in sheep's clothing. And so this is, I think, important context for us. But look at the use of lighting.
Yeah.
Look at the use of lighting, and the light falls only on the woman and those immediately around her who are accusing her. Look at the number of people in the shadows. And maybe it's my own paranoia coming up here, but how often are the accusers in the shadows?
Oh, yeah.
Right? You can't see their faces. You just know there's a crowd there,
Yes.
sort of gathering around. I think there's beautiful psychology in this. Notice who the only person in this painting wearing white is.
The one accused.
The woman accused of adultery. So Rembrandt is making a theological statement through his art here, and look at the pleading. Here is a chief accuser. I feel like a weatherman again here. Here's a chief accuser right here, and look at his hand, sort of.
Needs a laser
It's not like pointing a finger, but it's even worse than that. It's like a clasp kind of deal. And here's Jesus, sort of looking idly by in this.
Where's Jesus?
Right here.
Look how much taller he is.
He's sort of saying we are not amused, right, by this. And the only other thing that's lit up in the back is whatever this royal stuff is back here, to give us the feel of a palace or a cathedral or something.
Look where the light's coming from above.
Oh, yeah, thank you. The source of the light is from heaven. Yeah, I mean, this is like a whole Sunday school lesson in one painting, right? We can just read the scripture, look at the painting, and all go home. I had never seen this painting before. Had anyone else seen it? And, yeah, Chad.
Well, the light's in the top third.
The light's in the top third. Yeah, thank
Put
you.
a line almost straight across.
Sylvia, where did you see the painting? Sylvia, did you see
It's
it
in London. Yeah.
Oh, no. It went away.
Okay, all right, we'll take care of that. All right. Next painting. This is by an artist whose name I can't pronounce. Joachim. How do you say W-T-E-W? Whitwall. So this is early 1600s, okay? And this is the resurrection of Lazarus. So one of the things that strikes me about this is the vivid use of color for the time period. Okay, again, someone mentioned earlier, how did they get those colors made? This is like 1605, right? And look at the vivid mustard color here, the vivid. It may be the only time there's a Salvador Dali, we'll say a little bit, where Jesus is in pink, which I've never seen Jesus presented in pink like that before. But that particular shade of purple is interesting too, right? In this case, here is Lazarus, and again, look at the motion, look at the composition here. That's sort of swirling around, all swirling around, and then brings our eye to focus on Lazarus, who looks dazed and confused, right? He's like, what has happened to me? And I think that's an interesting point of view for the story of the raising of Lazarus, we put so much attention on the grieving of Lazarus and the miracle of Jesus raising him from the dead. We probably don't pay enough attention to Lazarus himself, who had to wake up and wonder, where have I been? Where am I? What is going on here? Where are my clothes, by the way? Where are my clothes? Yeah. Okay. Comments?
Pointers?
Try one of them. Okay.
I have a suggestion, Mark.
Yes.
Pull the arrow into the middle of the picture and then do Command plus.
We'll try it. Well done. Well, so now you can see it.
She just wanted to see Lazarus naked.
Christian, bad girl.
All I gotta say is, everyone's pretty muscular in these, all these lean people, like 9% body fat.
Well, they were walking, they probably were, because they were working, like,
They were walking.
physical labor or walking everywhere.
Okay, other thoughts about this man? Well, so here's Jesus. Yeah, Jesus is in purple with the Superman cape on.
Who's down on the left is leaning in some? What is that?
Oh, right here?
No,
Benjamin's on the green.
Oh, I don't know. Someone who's sort of shielding, right? It's an interesting composition device.
What about the lady to the right at the
That's
bottom?
his sister.
That's probably Mary.
That's probably one of his sisters, I would
One
imagine.
of them.
Mary or Martha.
It's probably Martha, because Mary's looking up into heaven.
Good
That's
word.
right, when Martha.
That may be
Mary's in there
her
cooking lunch.
behind the
And Martha's in there cooking lunch,
Okay.
and Mary's looking up into heaven.
Moving on. This is a piece called Christ Blessing the Children. The artist is Nicholas Mays. This is from 1652, also at the National Gallery. So Mays was a student of Rembrandt, and you can immediately see the influence there as well. This probably was inspired by a Rembrandt painting that's more famous of the same subject matter here. I note here this is found in Matthew 19 and Mark 10. Jesus blessing the children. So often when we see this depicted, we see only children around Jesus. And what's fascinating to me is, see if my pointer works here. It may be too dark. Can you see that?
Yeah.
What's fascinating here is look at the adults.
Yeah,
Look
the
how many
mothers.
adults are in the background.
The mothers.
And the mothers.
Well,
So
they
here's your
wouldn't have
Mother's Day
They wouldn't
painting.
have let their children go forward without, would you?
It becomes an intergenerational affair. So that's a lovely illustration to me that we think of that experience, that episode in the New Testament, as being about children. And it is, but it's also about more than children, right? This artist helps us conceive that what the lesson being taught is to more than just children. And that child is completely disinterested in what's going on.
I know, I was going to say, she's not even looking at
Right.
it.
But that goes so well with the sermon, where you're in Christ's hands, whether you want to be there or looking around or whatever, Jesus
Yeah.
has you in
Here's
his
the good
hands.
hands.
Yes, good
Yeah.
hands, yes.
So this illustrates today's sermon as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, thoughts on this? Someone else? Well, I can't keep up with all my devices here. I'm trying pretty good. I'll have to do it each time. Okay. So now we're into a little more obscure scripture here. Belshazzar's feast. Now we're back to Rembrandt in this case. Now, if you don't know the story, you probably actually do know the story. You just don't know the name Belshazzar, perhaps. So this is from Daniel chapter 5, and the Babylonian king Belshazzar looted stuff from the temple, and there's God's judgment is coming down. In the original text in Hebrew, I don't have Linda Garrett here to help me like she did on Wednesday night. Meeny, meeny, tiki. Something like that. That's not what that says. This is Hebrew gibberish here, to the best of our knowledge, unless it, yeah, it doesn't say that, right? But here's Belshazzar seeing the hand, the proverbial handwriting on the wall is based on this story, right? Here is the handwriting on the wall. Look at the divine hand writing, right? Interesting. It's just the hand, right? It's like something out of the Addams Family. Just thing, yeah.
Look at the shock on those faces.
Look at the shock on their faces. Exactly. Rembrandt does a wonderful job of reminding us that this was a shocking event that happened, right? Look at this server spilling the wine. Everyone is stunned in this moment, including the king, who is clearly the central figure in the painting, right? Who is taken aback and is turning around this way. He is the central figure, and yet the message competes for our attention as well. Interesting, huh?
In the Bible story, did the real hand appear? Because I always remember thinking that it's the
No, the Bible story simply says the handwriting appeared on the wall. Yeah, I think this is Rembrandt's way of dramatizing to say it was the hand of God. Right. Yeah, Chad.
Which, as usual, is very white.
Yeah. This is European art, yes. Absolutely. Other thoughts on this? Yeah, Mike.
Many years ago, and a lot of people here will remember this, there was a quiz show, and there was an older lady that was on that quiz show, and that was one of the questions. And they asked her,
What was one?
What was the handwriting on the
They
wall?
asked her what were the words, and we found out later on that she had been prompted on those. Because I remember I sat there and I thought, holy cow, how did she remember? Because she gave all the words and then what they meant and everything.
Oh. Yeah, you got to be a rabbi or a PhD student probably to know that.
He knew it.
Except, or you got to be Chad.
Or Chad.
Okay, this is a piece called Charity. It's a Van Dyck. So 1627-28, also at the National Gallery. So a little explanation on this. I give you some notes on the handout as well. In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, we most often translate those things as, now by these three, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these is love. Another way of interpreting that is charity. Faith, hope, and charity, and the greatest of these is charity. So this is trying to, the artist is illustrating charity, love. And to do so, here's another appropriate Mother's Day piece of art. To do so, love is illustrated in a mother. Here. This is the demonstration.
Why is she so, is she miserable or what?
Really stressed out.
She's got 3 children.
I'm like crawling all over.
Exactly.
So she's sort of cloaked in that white.
I think that's the perfect thing about Mother.
She's looking and saying, what have I done?
She's looking
God
to
help
heaven
me.
for help. Yeah. So Van Dyck portrays Charity as a loving mother with a protective arm around one infant while 2 others are embracing her. I thought it was a nice depiction of charity. And it does fit with Mother's Day today. Other impressions? Besides how stressed the woman is? Say again?
What's going on upstairs? That's her expression. That's the
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because there's about 5 more up there, probably. I mean, she doesn't look like she's waiting very long between. No, she doesn't.
It is interesting, and someone with more education on this than me would have to answer this question. It is interesting to think about when you have babies like this in art of this era, they're almost always males.
Oh, really?
And naked.
Yeah, they're naked, and that's how we know they're males. Right?
And chubby, tenderly at her.
And yeah, always a little chubby.
But the drapery is so elaborate.
Oh, it's quite elaborate. Yes.
Bart?
Yes.
Did you hear this comment back here?
I just thought that they would, a mother would be looking tenderly at the children.
And she's not.
No, she looks like she's dying.
Yeah. She does not look
I'm
like
not
she's
sure.
happy with her current place.
Okay, here's another image. This is the Holy Family and St. John the Baptist. This is by Jacob Jordan's, same period of time, right? Now, first of all, Jesus, baby Jesus here, who looks a lot like a doll, is holding a rosary.
Yeah.
So one of the things we know immediately about this painting is that the patron,
Jesus was Catholic.
the patron is Catholic, and so the artist is appealing to that by putting it. Clearly, Jesus didn't hold a rosary, right? So this is illustrative at this point. What's fascinating to me about this particular painting from this era is all the other paintings we see of Madonna and Child, like the previous mother, they're looking off. This looks like a modern day portrait in which they're staring straight at the camera. Everybody is looking forward at us, and her eyes are a bit like Mona Lisa in that they will follow you in an eerie sort of way, right? Because of the way she's looking straight at you. And Jesus here, who is a toddler, I guess, at this point, is looking a little off, right? His eyes aren't quite as creepy in this.
Is he blonde?
He's blonde.
Oh, yeah, he's blonde.
Is that supposed to be John the Baptist, that other kid?
Yeah.
There's one down there.
There's John the Baptist holding the cross.
Oh.
And here's Joseph.
That looks like he's in
Like he's painted in.
Right, yeah, he
He's
looks
been
like he's in a
photoshopped in.
photograph. And then what about that thing to the right of Mary? Is that a face too?
That's like that's a carved cherub head on a chair or something.
Oh.
Keep in mind the time period. Yeah.
This is going back for just seconds.
Okay.
It said suddenly the fingers of a human hand appeared
Oh, there were fingers.
and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand to the royal palace.
And the words were?
Meeny,
Meeny, tiki.
Uh-huh.
Teflon, something like that.
Something like
Sorry. I was so surprised to learn that there actually was a hand there.
Okay, we'll take that.
We'll take that.
All right, I'm going to move on. We're going to hit just a couple more here. Let me do Tommy's trick.
Hey, go Tommy.
So this is another one of my absolute favorites out of the whole set. Actually, I think I'll let this be the last one for today. This is Samson and Delilah.
Oh, I wonder why he was so good.
So this is by Rubens. You can tell that the figures are Rubenesque in this. 1609, 1610. Probably inspired by Caravaggio to do this painting. And look at the dramatic lighting here as well. Look at where the lighting is falling on this. Look at Samson's limp form in here. The fact that he has fallen over Delilah.
Is she cutting his hair right here?
So a couple of other comments on the way this is depicted. Number one, this is a really important use of selective nudity here because we see the temptation of her breasts close to his head, and we're reminded why he did what he did, right? But the other thing that's interesting to me that I've never thought about before is there are accomplices here. When I read the story in the Old Testament, I think of Delilah being by herself as the seductress in this case. We know other people put her up to it. And by the way, here they are, right outside the door, waiting expectantly for her to do the deed that she said she would do. But someone else is cutting the hair. Now, I don't think the scripture tells us who cut the hair. It got cut, right? But theologically, this was an important thing to me to think about those of us who become accomplices, in misdeeds, and aid and abet, perhaps, And not only there, but someone else is holding the candle. Right? So Delilah got some help here in this version of things. And again, the way the composition goes, this line just draws us straight here to where the action is, right here in that one section. What are your impressions or thoughts about this painting?
Oh, that candle wax doesn't drip down.
Well, there is no question that he was subdued on his own. There's no one holding him down. There's
Right.
no one making him do it. He's totally in.
Yeah, he has spent
He's all
himself,
in, yeah.
right?
She got him drunk. No, she did not. Look.
Well, I think it was, she brought him in, but for
Sexual.
pleasurable purposes.
Adult entertainment.
Other thoughts on this painting? Anyone?
It kind of strikes me as weird that she has her hand on his back, and it almost looks like it's in comfort.
It does look loving, doesn't it? Well, if you read the story, I think she probably did. I mean, again, Delilah's a complicated character here, who I think has tenderness, but also needs to do the bidding that she's been sent to do, right? We're all often a bit complicated, right? All right, I'm going to end today's talk with that. I hope you found some inspiration in something we've seen today. If you want to hang on to your handout, I'll bring some more next week, and we'll get to stuff. If you really want to peek ahead, you can. I'm going to have to talk faster. I'm going to have to talk a little faster next week. Thanks to our live stream folks. We're going to bow out from you now. For those who remain, it has to be a live stream today. And we hope that you'll join us every Sunday when you're available. If it's possible for you to join us in person, we would love to meet you as well. We meet every Sunday morning, about 9:45, 9:50, in the parlor at Wilshire Baptist Church, 4316 Abrams Road here in Dallas. If you'd like to know more about Wilshire, visit our website at wilshirebc.org, or also check out our YouTube channel at Wilshire BC on YouTube.